We're starting the second unit now, which will look at many of the different theories about juvenile delinquency. So let's take a step back for a minute here to think about why it might be important to study the causes of delinquency, why those causes might be a very important thing to know. As far as social problems are concerned, the cost to society in regards to delinquency is very high. There's the cost of the juvenile justice system as a whole, the court process, and the interventions such as day treatment, residential treatment, and other kinds of outpatient and inpatient counseling and treatments. The cost to society at large from victimization needs to be considered too, from the perspective of property crime, injuries, or loss of life. And there's a cost to the loss of productivity of the citizens when youth go down a path of counterproductivity that may affect their ability to be a productive citizen for many years in the future. Factor in that from a perspective of crime in general, about 20 to 25% of all crime is committed by juvenile offenders. So the cost to society of juvenile offenders is high, and there are good reasons to try and determine the reasons for juvenile crime in order to try to reduce the cost to society. So let's start discussing theories about juvenile delinquency. We start our exploration of the causes of juvenile delinquency thinking about what are considered the individual causes, meaning things about the delinquent child themselves that might cause them to be delinquent. At this point in the semester, I think it's very important to think about what a wide range of behaviors that the term delinquent actually encompasses. It's not just one single behavior. I pointed out earlier that the youth who curses out their teacher is a delinquent, as is the youth that gets into a fight with their parent, or the one that steals a bicycle, or one that commits an armed robbery with their peer, the one who commits a sexual assault, or the one that actually is charged with murder. It's such a wide range of behaviors that, in my very humble practitioner's opinion, it's quite difficult to come up with a theory that can explain such a wide range of behaviors. So let's use this idea as a bit of a backdrop as we explore some of the classical meaning older, and some of the more contemporary theories about the individual causes of delinquency. We'll be focusing here on the psychological, the biological, and the more contemporary and currently popular neurobiological theories. Just so you know, the more sociological theories will be discussed in the next 3 chapters. So let's start with what's known as the classical school of criminology, which of course was applied to adults, but at the time that these theories were developed, children were thought of as essentially miniature adults. Of course, our present theories of childhood development informs us that this is entirely false, but this was the belief system at the time. So the classical school of criminology includes the theorists Beccaria, Bentham, and Lombroso. These theorists developed the schools of thought that included the classical school, rational choice theory, positivism, and also constitutional types. The very first theorists included Montesquieu, Beccaria, and Bentham during the 1700s. We'll start our discussion with Beccaria and his theory of utilitarianism. Beccaria based his theory on the premise that the laws should seek the greatest happiness by the greatest number of people. This idea is based on the concept of utilitarianism, the idea that we should try to maximize happiness for society in general. He was a strong advocate for humane punishments. During his time, punishment could be very extreme. For example, cutting one's tongue out for blasphemy, or cutting someone's hands off for stealing. Beccaria believed that punishments that were too harsh were needless if a lesser punishment would suffice to accomplish the goals of deterrence. So, in order to determine what was the right level of punishment, Beccaria said that for punishment to work and to cease having evil in the world, all that was needed was that the punishment had to be more, and that would be just by a degree here, had to be more than the evil act itself. So there are some basic premises that underlay this idea. One, that the actor is rational and has a choice in the matter, and that, two, there should be speed and certainty that the punishment will occur. So then that begs the question of whether these two conditions really do exist. Because if they don't, then this idea of humane punishment may not be as good of a deterrent than what Beccaria had assumed. The next theorist to discuss crime and punishment was Jeremy Bentham. During Bentham's time, as during Beccaria's, the laws were extremely harsh and the punishments barbaric. Bentham is the theorist that fully developed the concept of utilitarianism. This idea recognized that people sought pleasure and sought to minimize pain, and that one could recognize that certain things or actions would bring about a certain level of pleasure or pain. So again, as I said before, there is this fundamental flaw with utilitarianism as a basic premise to develop a system of laws and punishment. There appears to be considerable evidence that people simply don't act rationally. People don't carefully calculate the chance that a certain behavior or action will bring about a painful condition if they engage in an act. And even more importantly, we now know that adolescents are particularly unlikely to be able to do this kind of assessment and recognize that they may wind up with a more painful condition if they engage in a certain behavior. We know that adolescents have not fully developed their prefrontal cortex area of the brain, and that this is the area that is able to understand future consequences. So this theory of utilitarianism may be hopelessly unsuitable for application to juveniles. Even so, at the time that Bentham was promoting this theory, there was absolutely nothing that was known about adolescent brain development, and Bentham's theory was a very convincing theory. Now, some of Bentham's theories were also very greatly criticized. But at the same time, he was lobbying for more humane treatment of criminals, which was something that was greatly needed during this time. And he is thought of as one of the most seminal theorists in the area of criminology.